You may be wondering why we at the Liberal Jewish Synagogue, together with Southgate and Northwood joining us today, are celebrating Shavuot, a day late. For Shavuot actually fell yesterday. Liberal Jews, like Reform and Israeli Jews, keep only one day of Shavuot, while Orthodox Jews in the diaspora observe 2 days in accordance with a takana, rabbinic legislation that added something extra to biblical law. This year, considering our circumstances, it seemed sensible and convenient to combine our online Shabbat service with the festival of Shavuot, which fell yesterday. But what is our justification for declaring today a Chag, when for progressive Jews it is a normal Shabbat? And if we do it for Shavuot, shouldn't we be adding another day to all our festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah? Although the second day observance of festivals was deeply embedded in the consciousness of the Jewish people for nearly 2 millennia, it was at one of the many theological conferences held in 19th century Germany in 1846 that the assembly declared second day festivals and the 8th day of Pesach, as well as 9th day of Shavuot, would have no more validity. Work would be permitted, and the eating of leaven would be allowed on the 8th day of Pesach. Today, in liberal Judaism, we have overthrown 170 years of progressive Jewish practice. On what grounds? Perhaps we should go back to the beginning and remind ourselves of the origins of the festival of Shavuot. What kind of festival was it? What distinguished it from other festivals? And how did it develop as an agricultural festival, celebrating the bringing of the offering of new grain and first fruits to the temple into a festival that commemorates what is the formative event of our Jewish mythic history? To begin with, the celebration of Shavuot in the Torah is given no specific date, unlike its companions Pesach and Sukkot, both 7 days in length and both beginning on the 15th month of their respective months, Nisan and Tishrei. Shavuot stands out without a date and is simply computed by counting 7 weeks from when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. And there's another major difference that underpins the singularity of Shavuot. For both Pesach and Sukkot are linked with major events in our collective memory as Jews, the Exodus from Egypt, and the 40-year period of wandering in the desert. But nowhere in the Torah is Shavuot connected to that pivotal and formative event which we celebrate today, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. In not one place do we learn that we must observe Shavuot to remember this most important and influential episodes in our collective memory as the Jewish people. The Targum, that's the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible in the 2nd century CE, calls the festival of Shavuot Atzeret, which means something like closing convocation, and it carries the poetic idea of Israel remaining with God for another day. In this way, Atzeret, Shavuot, is indissolubly linked with Pesach as a festival which brought to an end spring, heralded summer, and looked forward to other harvests. Even in rabbinic times, we find debates raging over the precise date of Shavuot between the Sadducees and Pharisees who disagree over when one should start counting down to Shavuot with the counting of the Omer, and between the sages and Rabbi Yosei, the former stating that the 6th of Sivan was the day on which the 10 Commandments were given, the latter, Rabbi Yosei, who seems to receive God's blessing and agreement over this, arguing that Moses in fact received them on the 7th of Sivan, that's today's date. V'skima kadosh baruch hu imo, says the Talmud, the Holy One, blessed be he, agreed with him. This might be adequate justification for declaring the 7th of Sivan, Shavuot, and overlooking the 6th of Sivan. But it wasn't that we overlooked the first day when we made our decision to observe Shavuot on the second day. It was that we wanted to, so to speak, stretch the festival so that it coincided with the day of the week that many of you tune into our services. Rather late in the day, I wanted to find out whether any other progressive congregations had done something similar, and I came across what turned out to be a surprisingly strict responsum from the Central Conference of American Rabbis in 1999. This was in response to a question from a rabbi in New York who asked whether his congregation could observe a second day of Shavuot so that his Kabbalat Torah class, his confirmation class, which would normally take place on Shavuot, could hold their service instead on Friday night so that more of their friends and family could attend. In the year that he wrote, Shavuot, as with us this year, fell on a Friday. Could he stretch the festival and observe a second day? The long response to this question reviews the history of the biblical festivals of one day and the rabbinic takana, which I spoke of earlier, which instituted a second day for all festivals, except for Yom Kippur. This had to do with the challenges of computing the calendar in ancient times. It's ironic, says the author of the responsum, that progressive communities find themselves wanting to reinstate the second day. But at the same time, the responsum acknowledged that progressive Jews, after all, have reclaimed many traditions which the early reformers abrogated and which in another era, our era, were found to be moving and meaningful. Traditions such as more Hebrew in the liturgy, the wearing of kippah and talit, dietary laws, and ceremonies surrounding marriage and conversion. But the author of this responsum also questions whether that is justification for reinstituting the second day of festivals. Doesn't our own progressive Jewish community and history make a claim on us, he asks? Shouldn't their teachings demand our attention and our prayerful respect? Why discard the instructions of our teachers without good and sufficient cause? And in the case of Yom Tov Sheni, the second day of festivals, we should ask ourselves the following questions. What were the reasons for which our predecessors eliminated the observance of the second festival day? Do those reasons still strike us as powerful and persuasive? Or have they lost their cogency in the context of our own Reform Jewish religious experience? And what sort of argument would count as adequate justification to depart from the widespread and long-standing minhag of our movement? To cut a very long responsum short, the conference forbade the rabbi from declaring the second day of Shavuot a festival on several grounds. First, the responsum argued, We no longer rely on an elite beit din to declare the new moon, which would determine the dates of the festivals. Mathematical computations do that for us, and they are available to all of us. Secondly, in spite of Maimonides' view that takanot cannot be annulled, there are other opinions stating that if the original justification for this legislation no longer holds, they can be abrogated. Thirdly, the responsum argues that the interests of Jewish life are best retained by observing just one day of the festival and not two. Fourthly, while conceding certain advantages to observing the second day of the festival, such as creating a unity within the Jewish community and extending creativity in liturgy and other ways, the responsum comes down severely on the side of not permitting a second day in the case of this congregation. And this is how the responsum winds up its statement. For when we declare a second day of Yom Tov, we are not simply making a statement of identity, planning a creative worship experience, or arranging an experiment in spirituality. We are declaring a festival. When we say that a day is a Yom Tov, we mark it as holy. We transform it from ordinary time into sacred time. We make Kodesh, holiness, out of Chol, that which is secular. We arrogate to ourselves the power of the ancient Sanhedrin to announce to the Jewish world, indeed even to God, that such and such a date shall be a festival. So the author of the responsum recommends that the service on Shabbat should reflect the theme of Shavuot, make reference to its readings, but that it should not be declared a Chag, and the liturgy should not reflect that. So where does that leave us today with our festival liturgy and Shavuot Torah and Haftarah readings? We made a pragmatic and temporary decision for this precise moment in time. No, we are not going to institute second days for all other festivals in the Jewish year, although come to think of it, we may have to for Rosh Hashanah this coming year to allow everyone who wishes to come in person to the synagogue and to practice physical distancing. But I would want to ask the authors of this responsum today, is it permitted in these unprecedented and extraordinary times to be more flexible and pragmatic in the way we observe our Judaism and keep our community together? Could they find some justification for stretching the festival into the second day, as we have done today? And here, in conclusion, I hope they would say, we are living in painful and difficult times. Our synagogues are closed. People are isolated in their homes, and we have the opportunity not only to reach out to members and non-members alike, wherever they are in the world, in a way that we have never been able to do before, but also to break down certain traditions and barriers, to experiment, to be creative, to be the architects of a forward-thinking, courageous expression of our Judaism. Perhaps finally, the reason that no fixed date was instituted for Shavuot in the Torah, and that there is disagreement in the Talmud, is that the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai is not only an indeterminate moment long ago in the collective unconscious of the Jewish people, but that revelation, as Franz Rosenzweig put it, is an event that does not make its home in the past, but is the experience of a present. Every day is Shavuot, a day when we have the capacity to renew the covenant made with our ancestors at Sinai. And every day we are called upon to observe and to listen, to take upon ourselves yet more mitzvot, to deepen our Jewish faith and identity, to be part of a community, to be respectful of our traditions and to challenge them. Every day we have the possibility of seeing what the founder of Chabad Judaism, the Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, saw, namely sky, earth and its fullness as God's outer garments, manifesting an inner spirit, the divine vital elan which permeates them. Whether you celebrated Shavuot yesterday or are joining us today to combine the blessings of Shabbat and this festival of Zman Matan Toratenu, the season of the giving of our Torah, I wish you Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. Amen.